Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander viewers are advised that the following program may contain images and voices of people who have died. This episode contains references to domestic abuse, gender dysphoria, and suicide. Australia might have golden soil and wealth for toil, but not necessarily if you're a woman, single, and over the age of 55. Recent studies show women in this category are the future face of poverty because they're the fastest growing group amongst the homeless.
When you think about all of the ways that the system is stacked against women, you know, the gender beauty gap,
the gender pay gap,
taking time out from work,
ageism,
the lack of superannuation. We have set up systems which are going to systemically disadvantage the women.
So, all of this means that Australian women retire with almost 20% less and are twice as likely to experience poverty than men. But for women, the biggest driver of mature age poverty is the very thing that was meant to give them financial security: marriage.
I thought that I was just going to get married and have kids, but not really focus on the money side of things. When my marriage collapsed, I wasn't prepared. I panicked. I realised what a vulnerable position I was in financially. I didn't have a credit card in my name, a utility bill, my phone wasn't in my name.
But the idea that a man is a financial plan is outdated, right? Today's generation of women aren't really going to be in the same position as their mothers and grandmothers. Or are they?
Of almost half the women working in Sydney earning $34,000 or less, 32% of them said that if their relationship broke down, they would be extremely vulnerable financially.
Which is a problem since women are already at a financial disadvantage. At the start of the COVID-19 pandemic, young women were more likely than young men to seek early access to their super. And since young women are expected to live longer than ever before, and their jobs are at greater risk of imminent automation compared to men, any retirement savings they do have probably won't be enough. So, what can the women of today, both young and old, do to secure their financial futures?
the system is stacked against women.
Fear of destitution was the number one reason.
What should a woman be digging for? Poverty?
The expectations on women.
Gender-based commentary actually has a very chilling effect on women's confidence.
We sell our young women short.
We've known for a long time that Australia's population is ageing. It's why superannuation became mandatory almost 30 years ago, with workplaces today contributing a compulsory 9.5% to their employees.
So the superannuation system works if you have a full-time job for the entire length of your career and you earn a good salary. Unfortunately, that's not the case for many women.
Studies show women are more likely to work in lower-wage pink industries, to take time out for babies.
What happens when women take maternity leave is that they will get some compensation for their working hours, but they will receive no superannuation. So that is a huge gap.
To return to work part-time and spend more time on unpaid, caring and domestic duties than men.
She's going to take years out of her career, which means she's going to give up promotions, pay rises, and super.
And by the time the average Australian woman retires, new research estimates her super balance will be 17.5% lower than the average man's. And almost 25% of women will have no super at all.
And that's one of the reasons why the great majority of people who retire into poverty are women.
Of course, not all women retire into poverty, but those who don't are still vulnerable, with women 2 times more likely to suffer elder abuse than men. A recent Australian study estimates that up to 14% of older Australians experience abuse each year, with financial abuse being the most prevalent. And with rising house prices, there can be increasing pressure on older women to give up their autonomy and transfer wealth within their families. But financial abuse isn't just the domain of older women. Younger women are also at risk.
Domestic violence relationships often start quite young. The biggest risk age group is 16 to 19.
And COVID-19 only exacerbated all of these problems.
Now that money is available due to COVID, a lot of women have been pressured to take money out of their super and give it to their partner. If you've taken out $10,000, that represents over $100,000 of earnings because superannuation is 9.5%.
And because superannuation compounds over time, a 25-year-old woman taking out $20,000 today will lose more than $100,000 in the future too. So, if you're a young woman starting out in your career, what options do you have to secure your financial future? To understand this, let's take a look at what worked and didn't work for mature-aged women. If you're an Australian woman over 55, the life you've lived probably looks different to the life of a young woman today. You would have grown up during the second wave of the women's movement, which fought for things like pay equality. So you might have been one of the first in your family to go to university or have a job. You probably still got married relatively young compared to today's average. And after having kids, might have stayed home. But if you did go back to work, you probably worked part-time or casually, may have had multiple employers and not been paid super, which wasn't mandatory until the early 90s anyway, so you would have missed out on at least a decade of payments. And for some, building superannuation mightn't have been an option at all. Female community leaders have gotten together at the Older Women's Network in Newtown for a chat about women's finances.
If I look at the culturally linguistic women, first of all, they come here when they are older, so they didn't work. And the ones who work, for example, I have worked for, let's say 20 years. My first 5 years, the company I was working for, they didn't pay my super, so that one was lost.
In the late 1990s, we had neither state nor federal anti-discrimination law that protected trans and gender diverse people. And the anecdotal evidence that we had was that 95% of trans and gender diverse people simply lost their jobs automatically when trying to affirm their gender identity. They were just fired on the spot. That means that people will have then had less access to superannuation, savings and other forms of wealth accumulation.
And to top it all off, most women over 65 are sitting in Australia's lowest income bracket.
And so they come to their older age, many of them not owning their own homes.
And sometimes they can't and don't want to rely on their children for support.
The other thing is, when women married earlier and had their families earlier, their children married earlier, and often if they fell on hard times, the children could have them home. Now they marry later, so there's no room for granny to come back home.
But even single older women who have savings can fall through the cracks. They're not eligible for social housing, but can't afford to buy a home either, which means they have to rent. The 2016 census found that the number of older women renting has increased by 97% compared to 2006. But only 1% of rental listings are affordable for a single person living on the age pension.
We have got to the stage where people have to decide, do I skip a meal? It's just so that I can make sure I get my rent payment in, or maybe I can't go to the doctor because it just costs too much. I need to pay my rent.
We know that if you're over 50 years old, your chances of getting a job disappear down the Googler.
The Australian Human Rights Commission recently found that older women are highly susceptible to discrimination in the workplace.
I think it is so deeply entrenched, you know, ageism and sexism. I mean, we get the double whammy, older, female, racism on top of that. It's a triple whammy.
And mature-aged women are also more likely to be looking after elderly relatives with less predictable needs and fewer services available.
You don't know how long it's going to last, and it's harder to fit into your working life. And that means they either have to do that in addition to their paid work or leave the labour market, which is problematic as well, not just for the women, but for the Australian economy.
After all, in a post-COVID world, hopefully more people will be working, and employing women over 55 not only enriches the diversity of our workforce, it can also reduce the risk of older women falling into poverty.
We've lived a life. We have skills that younger people don't have. Organisations have to start looking at older women as an asset, because we are.
I think that's important if you have that mixture across a workplace where younger people can mentor older people and older people can mentor younger people.
There's no doubt that women have come a long way since the 1970s, and younger working women are in a much better starting position than earlier generations.
And one area where we have a gender gap that favours women is actually in terms of educational attainment.
But even if men and women were paid the same, other changes would still need to happen so that young women can avoid many of the financial hurdles faced by older women today.
Women in Australia who have young babies have a strong motherhood commitment, so they do want to look after their children. But in Australia we don't have the policies that enable them to work full-time and look after their children.
It's a terrible situation when you can spend all your life working, a lot of it unpaid, you're caring for other people, and then you retire with nothing.
And due to COVID-19, the super gap could grow in the future, with one super fund finding women on average withdrew 4% more super than men. It's a situation that many transgender women are familiar with.
Well, a lot of trans women are accessing their superannuation funds on sympathetic grounds in order to cover the cost of surgeries. They're accessing their super because it's a do or die situation. So I know that for a lot of trans people, they're having to choose between owning a house and having financial freedom down the track, or transitioning.
Women who have no choice but to access the superannuation before retirement will face long-term consequences.
This money was for their future, they're not getting the benefit of it in the future, and they're also unlikely to be getting the benefit of it today.
Older women are also more likely to face ageism and discrimination.
And we don't value the wisdom, the experience, the acquired knowledge of older women in the way we do men.
But you've also got to help people to think about how they need to make sure that they're fit for purpose as they age.
A 2021 study found that up to 160 million women globally will need to transition to new jobs in a future world of automation, which means learning new skills, particularly in male-dominated tech industries. And because women are overrepresented in service roles, they're twice as likely than men to lose their jobs to automation in the next 10 years. So, what can women do to change and secure their financial futures? The fact is, there's no single silver bullet to solving the financial challenges faced by women. Many require systematic change to assist women to reskill and stay in workplaces longer. And so we need to rethink systems and workplace flexibility that actually work for women, rather than against them.
If you're having views entirely from white men over 60, that's not a great outcome.
It's basically bringing multiple different kinds of experience to the table when decisions are being made.
And that means more women and more intergenerational conversations.
I think one of the cultural values that we grow up with in the Aboriginal community that's sadly missing from the broader community is the respect we show for older Aboriginal women and for the wisdom of our elders.
One of the things which I enjoy is trying to help younger women not to fall into the big holes that I have fallen into.
Yeah, I was just, as you were talking, I was thinking of my daughter, and she's in a section where she's the only woman. None of the men are talking to her. And she said, Mum, I don't know what to do. And I said, well, darling, I used to every morning walk in and just stop and say, oh, hi, how are you going? And she said, oh my God, that works. Don't let them take the lead.
Michaela Jade, a Carbiggle woman and co-founder of InDigital, is also keen to facilitate intergenerational conversations. She's working to pass on the knowledge and wisdom of Aboriginal elders to a new generation, except she's using technology to do it.
What if we could go to our cultural places and hold our phones up to the cultural site, and our elders could appear in holographic content and tell us the importance of that site in their own language, using their knowledge for the right time, the right place and the right reasons.
InDigital is just one example of what's possible with harnessing tech for change. And if there was more diversity across all industries, the world might look a little different. But that's only possible if everyone's on board.
I've got 2 young men in my life. It's important that they stand up for women. They are the next generation. They are the change makers.
I think something that is really important, and something I think my mother would attest to, and being independent financially, I think is a major key to ensuring that you're confident no matter what happens.
But dealing with finances and the perceived maths involved might seem overwhelming.
Financial planning for a lot of us can be a really fearful step for us to undertake. If there was any advice I could give, it would just to be, well, focus on what you can actually do right now to improve your finances.
Facing your relationship with money and finding trusted professional help is the first step.
So when you start your first job, you'll be getting paid 9.5% super by your employer. You can increase that to 12 to 15% through salary sacrifice, which your employer can organise for you. And when you do that, I think you'll get used to living on a slightly smaller salary, but you'll be well set up for the future.
Building savings and super needs to be every woman's focus.
Any small amount makes a difference, whether it's $5, $10 a week. Just slowly keep topping up your super to try and get back to where you were.
Learning new skills can help too.
So I went back to film school when I was 40. I was probably the oldest student there, but I've always felt it was really important to continue to get skills.
Or taking steps to work through and learn about your finances.
Although women are less confident than men when it comes to investing, they're actually better investors.
If you don't have a fitness plan, how can you expect to be fitter? And the same can be said with our finances. If you don't have a plan, well, how do you know what you're doing with your finances?
Because ultimately, all women deserve safety and financial independence.
I really believe that money does buy us happiness. It gives us freedom, it gives us options, it gives us choices.
And that means choices to create the life we want. However, we each choose to live it.